So thank you all so much for joining us for Remarkable Ravens. Perhaps it is their watchful eyes or their loud calls. Perhaps it is that ravens are scavengers and thus found around dead things. Or perhaps it's because of Edgar Allen Poe's famous work, which associated ravens with death and doom. The truth is that ravens are possibly the most intelligent of all birds, and in the wider animal kingdom, their intelligence equals that of dolphins. Ravens are also very resourceful, which sometimes results in behaviors or situations that humans can misunderstand. Once you learn about these ultra smart and amazing birds, you'll be marveling at their intelligence and understand them in a whole new light. Today's presentation is led by Patti Steinman, the Education Coordinator for Mass Audubon's Connecticut River Valley Sanctuaries, which is based out of Arcadia in Easthampton and Northampton. And I again want to thank the Friends of the Library for sponsoring. So all nearly 100 of us who are watching live, and the several hundred more that will watch on demand. Let's give a big virtual round of applause to Patti for joining us here today. And Patti, you can take it away. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Robert. Okay, so today, as Robert said, we're going to be talking about the common raven, which is one of my favorite birds. It's not every day that I get to talk about one of my favorite birds, but this one definitely is. And I hope after today, it will be many of your favorite birds as well. Maybe it already is. So what we're going to do this afternoon is just have a little overview about the raven. And then probably one of the biggest questions is, what's the difference between a raven and a crow? So we will go over that. We'll talk a little bit about why they have a bad reputation. And then we'll talk about their intelligence. We can't talk enough about their intelligence. It's just amazing. Then we'll talk about ravens in Massachusetts. We do have them, and I bet many of you out there, I know there's people from all over New England, as well as other parts of all over the place. So I'm sure many people have been seeing ravens. They are a bird whose population is really on the increase. Then we'll talk some about raven behavior, and then a little bit about raven resources, and then what you can do to help ravens as well as other birds. And as Robert said, please, please, please feel free to just put any questions into the chat. So where to begin with the raven? So if you do get the opportunity to see ravens, and as I was saying, they are more common now, so it's not that unusual at all to be able to see them in your yard, in a park, at a wildlife sanctuary, and watch their behavior. It's pretty amazing. While you're watching them, you'll note that they're also always watching you and being aware of their entire environment. They're extremely alert. If you see their eyes, you can just see this alertness in their eyes, in their movement, in really everything about them. Yet they can be shy. They can be nervous of new things. They are, as Robert said, the most intelligent of birds. So for many years, and we'll get into a slide in a few slides talking about their intelligence, but the word bird brain came about because people thought that birds had tiny brains and that they weren't intelligent. But it's research really in the past 20, 30 years or so, and we're learning otherwise. They are very intelligent. They do have the ability to have cognitive thought. So pretty amazing. Ravens can solve complicated problems as well. There's a video that I hope we'll be able to see at the end that shows that. They have social skills, so they do live together in family units, and birds that are, and animals, I should say, that are social in their society many of them really tend to have higher intelligence. They need to communicate with others. The ravens have a mutualistic relationship in many ways with people as well as other animals. So something that they'll do that will both benefit them as well as others. They have a long lifespan. So another area in which animals that have a long lifespan, they need to learn a lot in order to live that long. And certainly the longer they live, the longer they learn and the more they learn from their mistakes. They can hold a grudge. There was an article that came out, I think it was this past winter. I know I had several people send it to me. I think it was in the New York Times, and it was about somebody had, I don't know what they did to a raven. They may have inadvertently destroyed the nest or something. And this raven held a grudge and would basically harass them every time they were tried to get into their house, to the point that these people were thinking about moving. They plan for the future. So that is something which is really, really unusual. They're not just thinking of today. They may store food. They may do things that lead scientists to believe that they actually do plan for the future. They are increasingly efficient and adaptable to challenges as well as to their environment. And they're a bird that can influence us to get what it wants. So they can actually influence people. They form bonds with other animals, including coyotes, or in New England, we don't have wolves, but in areas where there are wolves, like maybe Yellowstone, they'll form bonds with members of the canine family. And I put Bill the forest crew just to remind me of a bond that one raven shared with a member of a forest crew. The raven was injured and Bill helped him out. And this crew would have their lunch every day at a certain spot. They would leave their lunch boxes outside, and the ravens would come and they would pilfer, and they would open up the lunch boxes. They would take what they needed, but they would leave Bill's alone. And this happened no matter what was brought. Bill's was always left alone. And they're a bird that enjoys themselves and enjoys play. So with most animals, there's certainly some exceptions, but they play when they're young, which is a type of learning. But when they're older, it's basically about survival. But ravens and otters are actually another animal that will do this. They're so efficient in getting their work done that they actually do have time to play. And I say this not lightly, just because I don't want to anthropomorphize, but I have read it and just heard it over and over again that they do actually play. And again, there's some info at the end, some videos that I'll show you that will actually demonstrate that. So these are three things that I had highlighted in the previous slide that I just wanted to go over again. So they do have a complex brain, and their brain size is large compared to their body size. They do have that long lifespan of 20 to 30 years, so that they're always learning. And then we talked a little bit about their social system. So they accumulate information, they learn from others, they learn from themselves, and they don't always learn just what somebody's doing to be successful or what another raven is doing successful, but also they'll learn from another one's mistakes as well as their own mistakes. So just like us in that matter. Ravens are considered to be tricksters. They're considered to be thieves. They will steal food from others. They will steal items. So they might collect, if you're missing maybe a piece of jewelry that maybe you left outside, something bright. Members of the raven family are attracted to that. They're considered to be very brazen, very resourceful, mischievous, playful, cunning, and certainly creative. They do have a very wide geographic range. They can live in the far north. They can also live in deserts. They're very, very adaptable to different environments. In recent years, they've also been moving towards urban areas, so they will do well in cities as well. They have an extraordinary range and variation of habitats that they can survive in. They basically can live in all terrestrial habitats with the exception of rainforests. And here you can see their range. So they're not migratory. So this is their range where they would live year round. So ecologically significant, as every animal is, they have an enormous role in the environment where they're predators and scavengers. So they are like vultures, they're the cleanup crew eating carrion or dead things. They are also, which basically helps in preventing the spread of diseases. They contribute in their feeding as well. They're omnivores, so they'll eat basically anything, plant material as well as animal material. So they also help for seed dispersal and promoting for a healthy biodiversity. So ravens are in the family corvids. Nope, that's not COVID, but they are corvids. And worldwide, there's 103. In Massachusetts, there's only 4. So in Massachusetts, we have, and I should say shouldn't say all of New England, in southern New England, we have the American crow, the blue jay, the common raven, and the fish crow. And we'll go over the difference between those crow species and the raven in just a minute. But if you live in northern New England, you might be familiar with the gray jay, which is actually now its name was changed. It's now called the Canada jay. So it lives in the far northern regions of New England as well as Canada. Really likes the boreal forest, but it's called the Canada jay. And some of you, if you look at it up in a book, you might still see it as called the gray jay. So somebody sent me this little cartoon basically saying that the difference, I'm sorry, I can't actually read. I have something on my screen. I can't read the very top over there. But the difference between a crow and a raven is just a matter of opinion. So basically primary wing feathers are some of them are called some of those primary feathers are called pinion feathers. So a crow has 16 and a raven has, I think that says 17. So the only difference is a matter of opinion. So sorry, I couldn't help but put that in. So we'll go over now the difference between the ravens and the crows. So basically, size is 1, vocalizations, tail shape, throat feathers, and flight. So this over here is a raven. And take note of those shaggy throat feathers. The ravens have that. The crows do not. Also, note the tail shape. And we're going to look at another photo in just a minute where we'll compare them. But the raven's tail is more wedge-shaped. Okay, so here we have it. So the American crow, which is the more common crow in New England, is about a pound. It's about 15 to 18 inches. Whereas the fish crow, which is one which is just in the past 10 years moving into New England. This is if there's any folks out there from New Jersey or Virginia, or Florida, you might be very familiar with the fish crow. The fish crow is a little bit smaller, and it's in Massachusetts, and it basically gets its name not because it eats fish, but because it lives by water sources. So it lives by the coast, it lives by the rivers. In Massachusetts, if you're like where Robert is, by the Merrimack River, you would hear fish crows. If you're along the coast, if you're on the Cape or Rhode Island, anywhere up along the coast, where I am in the Connecticut River Valley, or if you're by the Housatonic River, this is where the fish crow is now beginning to move in. And we'll go over the difference in a minute, because sound is really the best way to tell the difference between the fish crow and the American crow. And then there's the common raven. And look at how much bigger it is. So 2.5 pounds, 24 inches. So almost double the length of the fish crow. So it is a big bird. And then here you can see the wingspan as well. So vocalizations. The American crow, we're probably all familiar with. If I asked everybody to do an American crow call, you could probably do that typical caw, caw. But do keep in mind that crows have many, many different types of vocalizations, at least 23 known ones, known meaning ones that scientists are able to take that call and relate it to some sort of meaning. And then they can also imitate. All members of this family can imitate other birds as other sounds, I should say, as well. So the fish crow is that typical caw, caw. I'm sorry, the American crow is that typical caw, caw. The fish crow is more nasal. It's more like an American crow with the Boston accent. So instead of saying caw, caw, it's more like caw, caw. And the fish crow also has another sound that sounds like it's always saying no. So, So some of you may have been hearing that a lot. They hang out in shopping center parking lots, scavenging for food. So something that definitely a bird that has been increasing. And then the raven has at least 40 known calls. The most typical is that ronk, ronk type call. And I'm going to play raven. That kind of screaming, think of it as just like flying, possibly just in an open area. That's always, to me, seems like a very sound of wilderness. So, as I mentioned, they can imitate sounds. When I worked in the Trailside Museum for several years, and we had a program raven. It was injured; it couldn't live on its own, and there was a water fountain, and there was a leak, and the property manager fixed it, and you could still hear the exact sound of like a drip, drip, drip. That bird also, its cage was next to a barred owl, so you would hear a very croaky, which was the raven. And there was a highway crew using dynamite for several weeks. I believe this was in Oklahoma. And they packed up and they were gone, finished their job, and you could still hear 3, 2, 1, kaboom. And that was the resident raven. Okay. So tail shape. So the one on the left, this is a raven, and the tail shape is it's almost triangular or wedge shaped, whereas the crow on the right, that's more squared off. And here we can see the raven on the left, and you can really see that wedge-shaped tail. You can also see on the raven that the thick bill, and the thick bill, and it's a larger bill. And the crow on the right, this isn't really a great way to see the tail, but again, knowing that it's squared off. Typically, the raven will soar more, like it's doing in this photo, and the crow will flap more. So not to say that a raven's not going to flap and a crow's not going to soar, but for the most part, if you continue to watch them, the raven will soar more, the crow will flap more. And then we have some feathers, the bristle feathers, those ones that look almost like whiskers that you can see on the raven that are not as pronounced as on the crow. And there's that ever watchful eye. So why did they get such a bad reputation? Perhaps it's their black plumage. Perhaps it's their piercing, ever-watching eyes, their croaking call, their diet as being a scavenger. But they also have been different cultures have cherished ravens. They've looked at them either as they are definitely many as mysterious, but many of them have almost worshipped them, while others have looked at them as very evil. So they really do have that either good or evil, but they are found everywhere in folklore and literature. So certainly we know Edgar Allen Poe wrote about the raven, Shakespeare, Thoreau, again, all over literature. In art and music, you can find ravens. There was a 1940 rhythm and blues band called the Baltimore Ravens. So, talking a little bit about our culture and how we look at them, a flock of crows, and feel free to write it in the chat, but probably many people are familiar with that a flock of crows is called a murder, and a flock of ravens is called an unkindness. So it's really our culture that has thought of them as in not very positive ways. And as I mentioned, there are many cultures. There's a lot of native tribes that would actually really worship them. So I had to put this little cartoon in as well. It's only a murder if there is possible cause. Ravens are essential for the Tower of London. So if anybody's been to London, there's 6 resident ravens that need to be there. Certainly throughout the years, they've changed the different ravens, but it's said that there needs to be those 6 ravens, or the tower will fall. So and this is the Raven Keeper over here. So I've never been to London, but I've been told by many people that when they go, one of the highlights is seeing the ravens. So they do usually clip their wings because those ravens get themselves into a lot of mischief. So again, that intelligence, and when they don't have to find food on their own, they're basically being fed and taken care of. They can get bored, and they have been known to be dropping pebbles or stones on passers-byers. They've been known to steal hats and do all sorts of mischievous things. So that Raven Keeper has quite the job. So their intelligence. If men, and I'm going to change this, if humans wore feathers and wings, few of them would be clever enough to be crows. And I use crows as the family, crows and ravens. And this was a quote by Henry Ward Beecher. So just looking a little bit at how scientists looked at bird intelligence. As I mentioned at the beginning, we used the term bird brains because it was thought that they only reacted instinctively to their environment, to things that were happening to them at that moment, and that they could not think. They did not have cognitive thought. And that was thought until very, very recently. Around 1900, there was the misinterpretation of the avian brain. They do lack a neocortex that mammals have, and that is partly the area where we are able to think. The ravens, though, and this wasn't discovered until just about 20 years ago, that they have something called a pallium, which is in their forebrain, which acts very much like our neocortex. It has packed with neurons, which is associated with thinking. So that wasn't discovered until 20 years ago. So now it's known that they do have memory for decision making, in the case of the ravens, very, very similar to mammals. And in 2020, so just 5 years ago, in Science magazine, this was groundbreaking research, which the researcher Sharon Begley stated that crows know what they know and can ponder the content of their own minds, a manifestation of higher intelligence and analytical thought, long believed to be the sole pride of humans and a few other higher mammals. So extraordinary new research has come out. Okay. So now it's known that they definitely are able to have cognitive thought. Some of them are able to make tools, think for the future. They have great memories. I mentioned about the one that was holding a grudge, but they definitely have excellent memories. They have a sense of play, and they can work together, hunt together as a group. So the list goes on of examples that show their intelligence. So I put acorns over here, and you can see this raven with, actually, this is actually a crow, I think, but with an acorn. And they eat an acorn, but they have a hard time in cracking it open. So there's many cases where some of them have learned that they can take it and they can drop it by a road, and then a car will go by and it will crack it so that then they get their food. So there's a video that I hope to show you at the end, and if not, I'll send the link, but where there was, I believe it was actually a Japanese crow, where they took it one step further and had a hard time going to retrieve their food with the traffic. So they went to a traffic light, dropped it by the traffic light, waited for the traffic light to turn red or to turn green, and then they went out and retrieved it. Ice fishing. If anybody is familiar with the PBS nature videos, you can probably get it online. You definitely can get it online, but there's a documentary of a ice fisherman who was out on the lake and sitting in his car, but the little red flag went up indicating that he got a fish. And this happened for several days. And then by the time he went there to get it, the fish was gone from the line. And then after several days, he went out and he saw that the thief was the raven. So the raven had to, again, it's thinking. So they had to recognize that the red flag meant that there was a fish. Then they had to grab the line in their bill, put their foot down without losing it, put their bill into the line again and pull. So just amazing. Counting, there's There's a book, it's a true story about a farmer who had ravens or crows basically going out and after the corn crop. So he had a blind and he went into the blind and basically he went out shooting and the ravens disappeared. And then the next day he went in the blind and they saw him go in the blind. So they did not come until he left the blind. So he thought, I'm going to outsmart these birds. He brought a friend with him. The raven saw two people go into the blind, one person leave, and they still did not go after the corn until two people left. The next day, three people went in, two people left. And again, the ravens were able to do this until this person had six people go in, five leave, and then the birds lost count. So just amazing. Wedding food. So just like Aesop's fable, ravens will take something that is hard. For instance, if there's a piece of bread or something, they'll put it in water to be able to soften it. Harassing dogs, cats, and otters. So I talked about how they can manipulate people or other animals as to getting what they want. So I should say that it's against the law to own a raven as a pet, but scientists who've had them and worked with them, as well as stories of people from years ago who did have them as pets at the time, would remark about how they would open up dog cages, let the dogs out, and then go in and eat the food that was in there. They have been known to pull the tail of either a cat or an otter who has some food, and then once they they'll work together with another raven. So one will pull the tail while the other one will then grab the morsel, the fish, whatever it is, and then they'll fly off and share it. They are known for opening backpacks, and I do have a slide towards the end with a quote from a park ranger from Yellowstone, where in many cases where they have signs up, basically warning the visitor about the raven thieves. And as I mentioned, the relationship with people. And the whipped cream. So there was a raven, or a few ravens, I should say, and they found a can of whipped cream. And one of them would hold it and push it down with its bill. So if you think of a can of whipped cream, it's not that easy for a bird without hands to do this. So one would hold it with its claws and then press it down with its bill while the other one got a treat, and then they would switch. And this was all in a book called The Gift of the Crow, which I'll show you the name and the author towards the end. So this is Bernie the Raven, who was like panhandling. I think this may have been in, I want to say New Jersey, I may not be correct, but I think it was New Jersey. And when traffic was stopped, would walk along by the cars begging for food. I mentioned before, with opening dog cages. There was one story of a raven that would whistle for the dogs, and I mentioned they can imitate, so could imitate the dog's owner perfectly, and would just start whistling for the dogs. All the neighborhood dogs would go see this raven. And we talked about stealing from backpacks and laundry and backpacks, also from clothes that are outside. They'll often steal. Many things have been disappearing from clotheslines where ravens are found. So one U.S. Fish and Wildlife employee stated that with other animals, you can usually throw out 90% of the stories that you hear about them, as exaggerations. With ravens, it's the opposite. No matter how strange or amazing the story, chances are pretty good that at least some raven somewhere actually did that. So I mentioned many, many stories, and again, it's definite that these ravens did it. Okay, and here's the quote that I mentioned before. This was from that same park ranger, and this is actually a sign that's at Yellowstone that says, "Ravens have become very adept at obtaining human food in the campground. They're clever, curious, and persistent. They can easily get into food packages, cardboard boxes, styrofoam coolers, and soft-sided coolers. Ravens can even pry coolers open with their beaks and unzip packs, stow all food, trash, paper products, and body care items in either latched, hard-sided containers or your car with the windows closed. Failure to properly store food and trash may result in a citation." So they are definitely very, very brazen. Okay. So here is, we talked about play. So here is a little video of ravens playing. Notice it has something almost like a yogurt cover or something. So just having themselves a good time. So the raven habitat, I mentioned that they live in a huge number of habitats, but they prefer open woodlands or clearings, coastal regions, cliffs, mountains, and boreal regions. Looking at their life cycle, they are monogamous. They mate for life. They are usually 2 to 3 years old when they will first mate. And this is just a photo of some aerial displays. So they do spectacular kind of dives and circles, the males basically trying to impress the females. These are what the nests look like. And the one on the upper right, that was one that was taken at the Quabbin Reservoir, which was actually the first documented raven nest in Massachusetts in the 1980s. But they prefer rocky outcrops and ledges or high trees. Some of them have been known to nest in basically like cell towers or transformers. The nests are usually 4 feet in diameter, so they're significant in size. They do usually use the same nest year after year, and both the male and female do build. I think I mentioned just in the last slide that they do mate for life. So that first picture of the nest that I showed you a second ago that I said was at Quabbin, it's hard to see over here, but this is, it was in this rock crevice over here. And this was a utility company's tower in Ashby, Massachusetts. And this was, we started seeing ravens nesting in Massachusetts in the 1980s. So again, the first one was at Quabbin, and not too many years after that, this one was seen. This was in Ashby. When with their young, with their eggs, they usually have 3 to 7 eggs. They don't, all of the chicks don't make it, but it's usually 3 to 7. The eggs are usually laid towards the end of March to the end of April. Incubation period, about 18 to 20 days. Nestling period, over a month. So they're with their parents for quite a while. And they only have 1 brood per year. Their diet is just about anything. So they're omnivores. So small birds, mammals, berries, carrion, plant material, insects. So they are, as we were saying, a newcomer to Massachusetts. So it was never documented prior to the 1980s as to whether ravens actually nested in Massachusetts. There were, however, 2 specimens that were found in a museum in the town of Adams, Mass, in the late 1800s. So it wasn't known whether these birds were residents, whether they were nesting in northwestern Massachusetts. But again, those specimens were found in a museum. And then in the late 1970s, we began to get reports of ravens. And this was pretty much in the northwestern part of the state. So mostly in the hill towns, in the Berkshires, and then well into central Mass, so towards the Quabbin Reservoir. It wasn't until 1982 when it was confirmed that ravens were here and looking like they were establishing territory. And then that territory was documented with the first known nest in 1983. And that was at the Quabbin Reservoir. And that nest was actually in a rock crevice. And it was the last known nest site of a peregrine falcon in Massachusetts prior to peregrine falcons being reintroduced, or that there was a reintroduction project, and they started coming back probably the late 90s, early 2000s. But again, that first nest was in an old peregrine nest site, so recycled it. So these maps show ravens in Massachusetts. The one on the upper right, that was what was the breeding bird atlas that took place in Massachusetts from 1975 to 1979. So basically volunteers, adopted an area in the state. They had a quadrant, so an area, and they went out during the spring, during the breeding season, and their job was to go out for a certain number of days and to look for documentation of breeding birds of any kind. So the ravens were just one. But basically they were documenting any type of breeding bird. So they were looking for possible breeding. So that might be if you see maybe a male and a female. Probable breeding would be maybe you would see them court tip display. Maybe you would see a nest, but you didn't see any chicks. And confirmed is that you definitely confirmed that you saw a nest with chicks or young. So you can see 1975 to 79, this is when we first started getting those reports in northwestern Massachusetts, and nothing was confirmed at that point. But what a difference between the 70s and 2007 to 2011, which is breeding bird atlas number 2. And you can see that those dark green ones, those are confirmed. So first we started seeing them, it was mostly at Quabbin and the northwestern Massachusetts. And then they really started spreading out. So you can see that they're just about everywhere, maybe with the exception of the islands, like at this point now. Uh, then the map on the left is a comparison of these two breeding bird atlases. So you can see those white triangles is the increase in raven population. So it is most definitely increasing. When this was done a few years ago, there weren't any documentation of ravens on Cape Cod, and I do believe that there are some now. But you can see that the population is definitely doing fine. Ravens, some special things about ravens. They have basically improved vigilance from predator. Oh, I'm sorry. They will breed cooperatively with other feed, not breed. They will feed cooperatively with other ravens. And this was a question that was posed as to why would they do that? So in many cases, if they found, so again, they're carrion eaters. So if they found a deer carcass, that's a big meal for many, many meals for one bird. And what this bird would do, though, it would be calling in other ravens to share the food. So there's actually a book called Ravens in Winter that poses this question and tries to come up with what the answer was. So again, it was just seen over and over again that if one bird found a carcass or a large source of food, they would call in others. And the question is, why? And here's the answers right over here. Were thought that it was basically to keep predators away. The more of you, the less the predator will get you, or the more other ravens there are. Sharing the danger of the bait, which is very similar. Keeping competitors away, so maybe keeping bald eagles away or coyotes. Kin selection, so in terms of if there's other ravens around, that if you're old enough to breed, you're looking for a mate. Status enhancement, so if you're the one who finds the food, you're going to be the popular raven. And juvenile gangs. And then so all of these are basically why they call in the others, but the big reason is that last one, the juvenile gangs. So it's thought that these are the young, less experienced birds, and they need these other birds, sometimes even to keep away some of the older ravens, but also certainly the predators. So, but it's an interesting thing when one bird will find a food source and then call in others. So they will tolerate, to a degree, other animals when they're sharing a food source. This is a raven with a golden eagle, and golden eagles don't actually nest in Massachusetts, but they do. They are found here sometimes they go through migration. And these photos were actually taken at the Quabbin Reservoir. So in the past, this was probably about 20 years ago when the reservoir would freeze. And if there were large animals like a deer trying to cross the reservoir, and if it was sickly or older and it wouldn't make it, it would be food for numerous species. So this raven was feeding with an eagle. This raven was feeding with an eagle and then decided to pull the tail of the eagle and send eagles, in this case, I think a juvenile eagle, flying. And then the ravens met their match when they tried chasing away and pulling the tails of turkeys, and the turkeys ended up chasing the ravens away. They certainly are a very big bird. Ravens have a special and unique relationship with coyotes and other members of the canine family. So wolves in places where you will find ravens and wolves, but not New England. So in this case, these again were taken at Quabbin, and the ravens have a hard time opening a carcass, whereas the coyotes would have a hard time traveling over deep snow. And these pictures actually aren't deep snow, but in general, the ravens would find a carcass, and then again in its area with deep snow, and then they would basically show the coyotes, lead the coyotes to the carcass. The coyotes were able to tear it open, and they would share it. So mutualistic relationship. So what can you do? Again, the raven population is doing fine, so that's great. But certainly be aware they have been prosecuted in many places. I mean, I mentioned about the going after farm crops, and they certainly, crows and ravens may certainly do that. So just educating about these birds, just in terms of what can you do about birds in general, supporting their habitat, supporting bird-friendly coffee, eliminating lead, toxins. I put gut piles, so those are in places where there's hunting, and that actually ravens have received a lot of lead poisoning by feeding in areas where there have been lead shot. So I believe that in many places lead is banned, so that's a good thing. I put understand West Nile. So West Nile virus affected the corvid population more so than any other bird species, or bird family, I should say. So here are the books which I would strongly recommend. So, and I can actually send this to Robert. I can send this slide to Robert, and then the next one, I think, which is going to be some videos that I would strongly recommend. But this last one, Gift from the Crow, this is probably the most recent book, and it's just an amazing read by John Marsloff and Tony Engel, I believe, is the illustrator. But they are from Washington State, I think Washington State, and they have done an awful lot of research. Ravens in Winter, Mind of the Raven, anything by Bernd Heinrich, I would strongly, strongly recommend as well. And I am hoping that this video works, but this is a demonstration of, I believe this is 007, this raven over here, and I'm just watch what's happening here.
I was looking for a quarterback.
Let's go!
These do bring up nice. Dix is the GOAT.
All right, can I stay in here?
Absolutely, you can sit and watch.
Right.
And we'll see what happens.
Come on then, send in your mastermind, because it's going to need that.
Alex studies wild birds, which he releases after 3 months of research. This one is nicknamed 007, and it's about to attempt what Alex believes is one of the most complex tests of the animal mind ever constructed. The bird is familiar with the individual objects, but this is the first time he's seen them arranged like this. 8 separate stages that must be completed in a specific order if the puzzle is to be solved. And if the bird succeeds, it'll be a world first. He takes time to have a look and then starts with the short stick. Stage 1. He finds it's too short to reach the food. He then sets off to get the first stone. But he drops it. And another. he seems to be stuck. But then, something seems to click. He deploys the first stone. And then another. Got it. The 8th and final stage. Success. 8 individual stages of one complex puzzle completed. That was remarkable. I've never, ever seen anything like it. Of all of the bird behaviour that I've seen, nothing matches that. I can hardly believe it. I'm still just running that sequence through my mind. It happened really quickly. But the immediate question is, of course, how on earth did that crow do that?
Yeah.
Starts with the short.
Whoops.
Do you need an easy way to feed your wild birds?
Sorry, I'm trying.
I'm Martha with Nature Nation. Let me show you how easy it is to use our seed cylinders.
Okay.
Our seed cylinders are made of high quality bird
So
seed.
Pat,
Some have
Patty, can you hear me?
insects,
I
different
can,
kinds
yes,
of
and I'm
nuts
gonna
in them.
turn this off,
And
Robert.
they're a
Yeah, the
great way
video is still
for
playing.
nest feeding
So
of
we can
wild
hear
birds.
it.
They tend to last a long
Hold
time
on.
because
To
the
know
birds can
just
pick and
how
choose
clever
what
they
they
are,
pull
Now we have
from.
two
look at
videos.
And the
these
bigger, messier
extraordinary
birds can't
Japanese
swipe the seed off of the cylinder like they do in your
Hold
ear.
on.
So they're very easy to load. They last longer than loose.
No
Sorry,
worries.
Robert, I'm not able
They
to go
come in
back.
actually 2 different sizes. This is the regular
So
size.
somewhere on in your web browser, I think there's a second YouTube video
And they
open.
also come in the larger.
I'm sorry,
cylinder
Robert.
variety,
I'm gonna just
which is
stop
a little
sharing.
tight, but
Yep,
more
that's fine. I think you have.
Okay.
inches across.
Whoops.
There's still a video playing somewhere.
There are mess-free.
Yeah, I know. I'm
versions
sorry.
where
I'm not
the
able
ingredients
to.
Don't have any shells, so the birds end up consuming everything.
I guess what I'm saying, Patty, is we can hear the video playing. We can't see the video, but we can hear it. Okay, maybe it stopped.
Okay. Is that okay now?
Yes.
Okay. So you can't see my screen anymore, right?
No, we just see your smiling face.
Oh, okay. My smiling, panicked face over here. Okay, so I do have one more video, but I'm not going to show it because I'm afraid that sound would just go on again. And I will send a link to these videos to Robert, if that's okay with you, Robert.
Yeah, and send me the bibliography as well.
Yes, I will. Okay. And I'm still seeing my screen over here, so I can't see your smiling faces. But if anybody has any questions, I will be happy to answer them. And I apologize for that ending.
That's okay. That's okay. So yes, let's take 5 minutes of questions or so, maybe a little more. All right, Christine says, I recently saw some smaller birds mobbing a raven who was flying overhead. Why do you think that happened?
Okay. So that, Christine, you named it. That is mobbing behavior, and a lot of birds will do that. So a lot of small birds, there's one small bird called the kingbird, which it's in the flycatcher family related to phoebes. Other birds, starlings, many birds will mob others. Probably could have been that the raven or the crow may have tried to steal an egg, may have done something that was harassing the small bird, may have just been in its territory, but a pretty common thing to see. And in fact, sometimes if you see birds mobbing others, that's often a good way to tell you that there's maybe a larger bird like an owl, a raven, a crow, owl, a raven, a hawk in the area.
An anonymous attendee asks, do the pesticides applied to lawns affect the ravens?
Yes, I would say they could apply to, I mean, I would say less so ravens, just in terms of they're not going to necessarily be there, looking for food in your yard. But I would say that the pesticides are in my mind, one of the biggest evils. It's in lawn chemicals. I mean, things that we can hopefully get by without. But we haven't seen a huge effect of ravens, again, just because they're not necessarily in your backyards yet. With their growing population and moving more towards suburbs and urban areas, my guess is that they probably will become more of a problem.
Joan writes, are ravens and crows affected by bird flu?
Good question, and I don't know the answer. I think it's all too early to really know all of that at this point, but something that I think we really do need to be watching for.
Carla asks, so I think you gave us the average lifespan of a raven, but how does that relate to other birds?
Depending on the bird. So some of them, so certainly the whole corvid family lives for a long time. I mean, some birds, some songbirds may only live maybe like 4 or 5 years. So it really depends. There's some birds that can live, in their 30s or so. So really variable.
Leslie asks, does the raven's body bounce when it vocalizes while the crow's body stays still?
That's a very interesting question. I think it has to do with the type of call that it's doing. I mean, I've certainly seen both birds kind of bouncing as they're calling, but also depends again on where they're perched, if they're on the ground, if they're on a tree. So I really think their body movement would have to do with where they're perched, as well as to kind of the type of sound, and if you want it to really resonate. So I wouldn't say that the ravens does and the crows doesn't. I would say they both do.
Do ravens join crows in the winter in their large flocks, such as what occurs in Lawrence?
No, they wouldn't. So the crows, Lawrence is a great example, and we have one in Springfield as well. So the crows have large roosts in the winter, and the ravens will do their own roosts. So they're not as big as the crows, because we certainly don't have as many around, but there are places like Burlington, Vermont, supposedly has a fairly large raven roost, but by large meaning maybe 100, maybe 150. Quabbin Reservoir has maybe in the double digits of ravens in the winter. So they will roost, but they don't roost with the crows. However, fish crows will roost with the American crows.
We'll take a couple more questions. An anonymous attendee says, why are the magpies not considered corvids? They seem to share some characteristics.
They are. But I just went over the corvids that were in New England. So they definitely are.
Pat asks, Patty, how would I find a list of Mass Audubon's spring and summer children's events, especially around Plum Island?
Good question. So if you went to Mass Audubon's website, massaudubon.org, and then go to programs, and then there would be a place where you could put in Joppa Flats, which is the one by Plum Island, and then you could choose between audience, and you would do children or families.
Sarah says, I saw a video on social media not too long ago where a crow or a raven was pecking a turtle to get it to hurry across the road. It was like the bird knew the turtle was in danger and wanted to try to keep it safe.
That's interesting. I'd love to be able to Google that and try to see that. Thank you for giving me that information.
So I think we have some comments, but we've answered all the questions. So okay. I think we are good. We've gone the hour plus 5 minutes or so. So Patti, any last words for the audience before we wrap up?
Just thank you all for your interest in ravens. And again, they are increasing. So if you see a big black bird, don't automatically think it's a crow. Take a look at it. And also take the time just to watch the behavior of ravens, really of any bird, and enjoy your weekend.
There we go. So folks, let's give Patti a big virtual round of applause for a great presentation. Look for an email from me later today with a link to this recording, and I'll also happy to include any video links and bibliography. I'll also include information about some other upcoming virtual programs that might be of interest. And when you exit the Zoom, please take 60 seconds and fill out the feedback survey that should pop up. Your feedback is greatly appreciated. So thank you all so much, and I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their day. Thanks again, Patti.
Thank you, Robert, and thank you, everybody. Take care.
Bye-bye.